Hello, this is Jay McCluskey, and it's a joy to share with you again in our third session now on Introduction to North Cleveland Baptist Church. And we have talked about some generalities about theology, and in particular, a little more about Baptist theology as followed in our church. But we're going to talk about more of the specific story of our congregation in our third section about the history of North Cleveland Baptist Church. So I hope you have your notebook and have the paperwork for that section. And also, one of the advantages of having a notebook that we supply in the office, or we'll have a downloadable version, is that it has a complete copy of the printed history of North Cleveland Baptist Church that was updated back at our 75th anniversary. Ken Russell II, who grew up in our church back in the 80s, he wrote the first 50 years of history. And when we came to our 75th anniversary, we asked Ella Sue Osment, who was an English teacher from Bradley High School and very beloved, and she wrote the last 25 years. And I'd like to give a shout out to my mother-in-law for her contribution, because when I became pastor in 1986, we put my in-laws on the church mailing list. So all that time they had been receiving a copy of our church newsletter in the mail, and she kept every single one of them and kept them in chronological order and bound them together year by year. And she brought those back, and we gave them to Ella Sue to help her write that update to our history. So that was a great thing that was shared. You can see the beginnings of our church from your outline, that the North Cleveland Baptist Church officially began on August 15th, 1937, though the history of our church will tell some background that led up to that point of launch for us. There are two ways really to kind of primarily focus on the story of a church. Two ways to track a church's history is through the history of its buildings and of its staff. And so those are a bit easier milestone places. We'll note those as we go through them. And a bit of information about the facilities, the building of our church. Our church has kind of piecemealed as property has come along for them to buy different partials that were adjacent to what they already owned. And so in your material there is a document started like this back about 35 years ago, and I've penciled in and updated a few things that we've acquired since then with building and also land. But it can tell you a bit how the property expanded and when the buildings were built. And again, you can see how that kind of came together just as God was working on it, supplying the church some of the spacing that we needed to build and to expand, and we're grateful indeed for that. So that's something that is worth some of your attention. So we're going to look through a timeline, and I hope you'll read through the entire thing. I am going to highlight a few things. Some of them trigger stories that I have in my experience as we walk through them together. So I hope this will be a way. It doesn't tell the complete story, but it does tell a good amount about what has taken place to lead us to this current place in time where God has brought to us. And so you can see back in 1937 for $150, the original piece of property back there on Franklin Avenue, back on the back part of our property now on the west side, was originally purchased, and what a bargain price that took place. And a building was built, if you can call it a building. It's often referred to as the shed because it was a very basic place there. There's some photos of it in the church history in your material. And there, as they started on August 15th, H. Lester Lewis was called as the church's first pastor. Preacher Lewis, as he was known, I never met him. I did meet his wife before she passed away when I was very young pastor here. Preacher Lewis has some ties still to our congregation. Patsy Bettis in our church families is his granddaughter, and we're proud of that legacy that we share together. And I should mention also that 102-year-old Norman Barnard is the sole surviving charter member of our church. It goes all the way back to his boyhood when he was among the first members of North Cleveland Baptist Church. Preacher Lewis was also useful in founding of Waterville Baptist Church in Bradley County and Bellefonte Baptist Church. And so he was planting churches even way back then. 1944, auditorium was added and built there. The old white church was what we typically hear it referred to, and there's some photos of that in your material too. And it faced Franklin Avenue, and that was the place of the church for its beginnings. Later, that church, this is an interesting part, a bell tower was added to the top, and some folks in our church went and retrieved a donation of a bell that had been retired off of a locomotive, retrieved it from Knoxville and brought it and put it up in the bell tower there of that church. And Jack Stewart from down the street on Franklin Avenue, a devoted church member, would come and ring it on Sunday morning to call the faithful into the house of the Lord. Many years later, back in the 60s, when that building was torn down, we lost track of the bell. But we found it back. Dot Franks and our church family just happened to know where it had landed, and we got to come back to our church about 12 years ago. That was really exciting. Joe Stewart, Jack's widow, was still living then, and she came and was part of that celebration, as well as when we built the bell tower in our prayer garden, and we put it there. And there's a story of the bell that's there at the the bell tower, that you're welcome to look at. That was the old white church that stood as the home of North Cleveland Baptist Ministries for a long time. In 1946, after Preacher Lewis no longer was the pastor, the church called C.E. McDonald to come and be with us. And we still have some lingering family connections there. Gene McDonald was married to Charlie McDonald, who died a few years back. But Charlie was Preacher McDonald's son, and so they just were a dear, dear part of our church and our family. In September 1950, on your timeline, you'll see we became one of the charter churches in the membership of the Bradley Baptist Association. Years later, in 1986, right about the same time I came as pastor, the association built and completed the building on a corner piece of property. If you can see on your guide there's a note there on the Arnold property in the upper corner. And we became neighbors, and the church sold that land at cost so that the association could be next door. And that was just a great fellowship and a great relationship that we get to be so close to the good work that goes on there. In March of 1950, our church purchased the land behind the church, and it bordered North Lee Highway. And what a great decision it was to purchase that property that bordered the main highway, isn't it? Highway 11, before the interstate system. You know, the main route south to north in East Tennessee was Highway 11. And so that was part of wisdom of God and His providence that was available. And they bought that property, and then they built the sanctuary there in the mid-50s. And again, a very brilliant idea is they faced the sanctuary toward the highway and not toward Franklin Avenue like the old church had been faced. And what visibility, great benefit that has been for us over the decades since then. You'll note in 1957, I.C. Frazier comes, and so the first 20 years of our existence as a church that had two pastors, and the tenure of pastors kind of shortens for a while till a guy named McCluskey shows up. But I just kind of wanted you to note that. In August of 1962, Gross Robinson became the church's fourth pastor. The long-term people here who knew his ministry spoke so warmly and fondly of him. And years ago, on a Saturday afternoon, I just happened to be down here at the church facility not too many years ago, and there were some people just walking around looking in the windows. So I said, can I help you? I'm the pastor. And they said, well, one of them said, I'm Gross Robinson's son. He used to pastor here. And I said, oh, I'm the pastor here. And I took him on a tour of the church, and it was just a God thing to have that little link together with such a respected history of our church. You can note in 1965 that the steeple was added to the sanctuary. It wasn't part of the original building of that sanctuary we still worship in, but was added there in the mid-60s. And I should also note that in the 70s, a tornado took it down, and it was replaced by the current steeple that we have there. We're picking up some property, Preacher Byler coming as the pastor. But in 1969, there was a note there about the work of North Cleveland Baptist Church to help the collegiate ministries at Cleveland State Community College. Now, that is particularly in what was called the BSU, Baptist Student Union, now Collegiate Ministries, the building that is there just off the campus at Cleveland State that still does good kingdom work. But also it's worth note that the initial semester or two of Cleveland State Community College class took place, inside North Cleveland Baptist Church. The facilities weren't yet built yet and ready. They wanted to launch the semester, and so our church provided housing for them, and we're proud of that link in their history, and they seem to be proud of our link that we share with that too. In 1971, there's a mention of a mission that was done in East Cleveland, and the Udys headed that up. Gene and Betty Udy, and the Udys were missionaries in Africa, beloved people in retirement. They came back to our church family for a while, and just servant-hearted, giving, full of grace folks. Gene Udy passed away some years ago. I had the honor of speaking at his funeral. We continue to remember and claim Betty as a dear part of our church heritage, but they're just dear, dear folks. I mentioned on your outline too, in 1977, it's noted the piano was purchased, and I say that for two reasons. One, it is the same piano we still use for worship in our church, and second, it was so loved by Nancy Paul. She was so proud of that piano. She thought it was the best piano in town to play, and who's going to question her on that? So we appreciate that very, very much, and it's just, what are you still using that you've had for that long? Well, the piano is an answer here in our congregation. In 1980, a garage was built on the back of the annex, and it's my understanding that the garage infringed accidentally on the Dunlap property. And so again, on your little diagram, you see the Dunlap property, and that kind of instigated the process through which the church bought that piece of property and became another little section there, again bordering the highway that the church could own. And you can see that the Hooper and Arnold property come along not too long after that. In August of 1986, what a great day. I still remember this, that the church called me as its 10th pastor, green, wet behind the ears, inexperienced. What a great leap of faith they were willing to take. And I had prayed that God would give me a church that I could become family with and have a long tenure as pastor, and he has abundantly answered that prayer. Now, when I first came, again, 26 years old, the church had already been talking, even in the interim time, when Dole Suits was the interim pastor, about replacing the windows in the sanctuary with stained glass windows. And there was some conversation. Decided to go ahead and pursue it, dependent upon being able to raise the money. Now, it sounds like a great bargain today. It sounded like an enormous amount of money then, but we needed about $30,000 to buy the windows and to get them installed and put the protective plastic glass over them, those things that were needed. Now, trust me, at that point, the weekly church offering was somewhere around $2,000. So when you're asking for $30,000, that's a big, big leap. But I remember that day that we took up that special offering, and when the counters finished tallying it all up, at the top of the tally they had written the word hallelujah, because it exceeded all that we needed, and we could give the go-ahead to the stained glass window company, and they came very promptly, I remember, and did the work. And today we continue to be proud of that. I've preached through the window scenes in the life of Jesus 3 times at least in my years here. That just makes a good track for the study of the Gospels and the ministry of Jesus taking place. In the summer of '89, you'll notice there another renovation to the sanctuary. The sanctuary had been renovated in the late 60s. Gives it much the look that it has now. That's the biggest renovation, frankly, that has taken place, was between 1955 when the sanctuary was built, and then in 67, 68 when it was renovated. There was a major renovation when that took place. But we've worked on it since then, elevating the choir loft. We took out some theater seats that were used in the choir loft and in the balcony, and we put pews in the balcony and individual chairs in the choir loft. We elevated the choir a little bit higher so that they could be seen and heard better. We reshaped the platform area, and we've done a couple of things since then also, of expanding the platform, and some other items. And so the sanctuary has been updated on a fairly regular basis, not only in its appearance of things, but also in the electronics that are a part of modern day worship that we share in together. So I want you to note those. There are 3 capital stewardship campaigns that we conducted in roughly the 1990s to help renovate some things, pave a parking area, improve our restroom facilities dramatically, and close the Welcome Center, purchase some things that need to take place. You'll see them on there: forward in faith, keeping in faith, and faith for the future. Just those notes that we were asking the church to dig a little deeper, to help us update some things, renovate the kitchen area, to renovate the annex. We gutted the annex basically about the year 2000 so we could take on the shape it has now, and we got some walls that we could open or close and give a lot of flexibility to it. All that was part of these capital stewardship campaigns: forward in faith, keeping the faith, faith for the future. And that kind of paved the way for some of our more ambitious construction that was going to take place a little bit later. There's some stories behind a few things that I thought worth mentioning. The park property listed up there had a house on it, and found the lady was agreeable to selling it, and so our church bought that. And when it came time for her to vacate the property, we found that she had a lot of cats and animals inside that house. We spent a good amount of money to make sure it was livable, and it became a guest house and a mission house that was used for lots of people for a while. It did get to the point and had some flood damage that we needed to take that down some years ago, and so it was demolished. But we're glad we have that piece of property, and that was the primary purpose in that. You'll also notice here in the bottom right corner the Brooking property that we purchased there around the year 2000. Kind of an oddball that we had on there for a long time. Mr. Brooking really wasn't interested in selling, but eventually he did sell it to Joe Rogers' company, and they offered it to the church. That piece of land, it's about 1 acre, for $400,000. Now that was a lot of money, and it was a real struggle to know whether that was a purchase we should make or not. And the church had a vote and voted no, that was too rich. We shouldn't do that. And so we kind of thought the door was closed. And in the meanwhile, this is how God's providence worked. We did the plaza area we built there at the front of the church that helped the looks of our church a lot. We were able to do some other improvements in our facilities and things that we would have poured all that money into buying the Brooking property. But a couple of years later, Mr. Rogers offered us again to buy that property, and he reduced his price to $325,000. And the church had another business meeting. This time we voted to buy it. And we pretty quickly paid off that property, and we're glad we own it. So we can kind of control what's in the immediate area around our church building. And it allowed us to close the street. The city granted our petition to close the street, Ferris Avenue, that ran right down there. Our children had to cross the street to go to the playground. Of course, you pulling into the park in the church, and that was an issue too. So a lot of good things happened with the purchase of that property. So we're grateful for that. In 2004, we had our first patriotic service that has just become a regular on the Sunday closest to the 4th of July. I believe Sunday fell on the 4th of July that year. And we said, let's do a patriotic service. Everything's patriotic. And so we did. And we've kept that going. It was about 5 or 6 years later that we started featuring one of our veteran stories in each one of those services, which is now part of that tradition, and we are so proud of the service that they have granted, and so we passed that one along too. May 2007, we've been talking about some major construction and some pretty major renovations. And so the ideas were formed, the idea of pursuing it. The church seemed to be on board about things and enthusiastic about it. So all we need to do is raise some money. And so we started the For a Future Generation Capital Stewardship Campaign. Now, back in our previous 3, Forward the Faith, Keeping the Faith, Faith for the Future, we had raised over a few years about $200,000 to $300,000 in any one of those 3 campaigns. But now we're talking about a project that's in excess of $1.5 million. So we are going to challenge people to dig a little deeper, and they did. And the campaign launched, and with the initial monies that came in, we got the architect to draw the construction grade blueprints that we needed. In the spring of 2008, we bid the job out, and we voted to break ground to borrow the money that was necessary for us to take place. And then in July of 2008, we had a groundbreaking ceremony, the first groundbreaking ceremony the church had since the 1950s for the sanctuary. And what a great evening that was. The plow that was used in that groundbreaking ceremony is still outside the doors of the activity building, and you can see a little plaque there, and that's what we used to break ground. We all grabbed the rope and pulled together because we knew we were going to have to do all that work together. It took not quite a year for the construction of the activity building, and we also were doing major renovations in that time too for the preschool area that we remodeled and redesigned in major ways, including putting restroom access to every one of the preschool classes. So a lot of work went in that. We basically gutted the basement of the church below the sanctuary so we could put our offices down there, and that's been a great help to those who work here every day, that we're all around each other and our offices are close together and we communicate a lot easier, and that is just the daily use of things. And then in June of I guess that would be 2009. We finished the activity building. We had a dedication service to the Lord there. It was just an exciting thing that God enabled us to do and sharing that. We were still paying for the construction taking place. We finished all that. We're still about $1.25 million in debt, maybe a little more than that. And so faithfully people gave to that campaign for future generation. And then we had a campaign called His Vision, Our Purpose. And then we had a campaign called Grace to the Finish, all of which was trying to pay for the construction and ultimately retire the necessary debt that took place. Around 2000, I also want to mention, I'm backing up a little bit, 2000 and also in 2001, we took our first international mission team. We've taken a lot of mission teams to a lot of places, and some of those are noted on the timeline. But the first time we've gone overseas to go to Brazil. Now, we've gone 5 times since to Brazil because of our connection to Chris and Lori Heil and their work there. But that was a meaningful thing to take place for those couple of years. Those were construction, building chapels for new congregations in 2000 and in 2001. So we go back there in 2010 when we took our first primarily student group internationally. And as you can read on through there, there's quite a few then following that student mission trips that are going overseas to Honduras, to Mexico, to Puerto Rico, to Nicaragua. And I'm very proud to expose our young people to the mission needs in the world, the mission activities in the world, to give them a mission-mindedness in their thought process, a mission heart in their emotions. So that was a meaningful thing. If you look down in the year 2013, you will note the first time that our Vacation Bible School centered around a full drama presentation. We were trying to do some things unique, so we weren't doing the same curriculum that other churches in our area to make ours more unique. But here's the first time we said this is really going to be unique, and did the drama base that we've carried on ever since then. And very proud of that. Lanny Green runs with the ball a lot with that good work, and salute to him and to all those that make it happen. So just to say that is one of the showcase items of our ministries, and part of the reason that in Vacation Bible School 4 out of 5 children who participate are not among those who are regularly a part of our church. And so that says something about the reputation and the meaningfulness of this. In 2014, this was a lay-led and pretty much carried out construction project to reformulate the upstairs, the education building, which was primarily in an old setup where you had an assembly room and classrooms off of it, and we didn't have much assembly and breaking into classrooms going on, just individual classrooms. So if you go up there now, you'll find a lot of individual classrooms of varying sizes, so we can accommodate various sizes of classes that are meeting there. And again, largely that was done just through the lay leadership of the church. So I remember those of us who came out to pull up the old carpet. And when it came time to paint, we had paint night with Dr. J. And so for a few Tuesday evenings in a row, I believe it was, just volunteers came out and we put paint on the wall before the new carpet went down. And so that was just the spirit of the people of our church. I will note in January of 2016, boy, it's just the end of an era in our congregation when Nancy Paul retired. She had played piano well over 50 years for us. She was an extraordinary lady, a gift of God to our church. And so that just needed to be marked in our history, that was a closure of something that had begun back in the 60s when she became our church pianist. And even as a young pastor, I remember saying, how did I get Nancy Paul, greatest pianist I ever knew? How of all the pianists in the world did she land in my church? Just a giftedness of God. Well, I said we had borrowed a lot of money for our construction, so I note there in 2017 that we had that Sunday that we paid off all of our indebtedness. It was part of our church's 80th anniversary. I really, be honest with you, I kind of wondered, how God was going to do this. I thought maybe, when we got our debt down and we were giving at such a pace, about $2,000 a week was going to debt retirement, and roughly sometimes around $10,000 a month. And so I kept thinking, when we get to like $1 million, maybe somebody will bring in a check for $1 million and say, here's the rest of the debt for the church. I'm paying it all off. But that didn't happen. And then I thought, maybe when we get down to $500,000, and maybe somebody will come in with a check. That didn't happen. And I thought, maybe $250,000. Didn't happen. Maybe $100,000. Didn't happen. And we just kept whittling it away. We had some significant gifts along the way, and that was helping so much. But eventually we got to this anniversary Sunday in August, at our 80th anniversary, and we needed about $30,000 more to finish paying it off. And again, we would have gotten there in the next few months. But I said, everybody, just go ahead and give it now if you can. If you can go ahead and give one time what you would give over the next few months, go ahead and do it now. We gave just about that exact amount and a little more. And so that was a great thing that we were able to complete and do our debt retirement. It was an ambitious project. In a period of about 10 years of raising money, we were able to do all the major constructions that we still continue to enjoy around the church. We are in, I think, our 4th year now of Big City University coming aboard with us there. So I think that started in 2017. That was just something God brought to us. Part of our county school system needed a housing place for latchkey children to have a safe and quality place, and we were able to supply that for them, and it allows us to reach and minister and pray for some families that may not otherwise walk in the doors of our church. And so we are happy to be the host of Big City University, and we continue to appreciate their staff and the love on the families there. I also mentioned that in 2019, our students took a trip to Honduras, and I didn't go on that trip, but the leadership and those young lives, they came back and they had been transformed. Some of them had been on many mission trips, and some of them in some impoverished settings in the world, but it meant so much, that ministry, that God was calling our church into some deeper partnership with what's called Open Eyes Ministry in Honduras. And so since then, that has become one of our lead partnerships. A lot of funds go. We regret we haven't been able to send teams over the last couple of years due to a worldwide pandemic. We look forward to going back and doing some more hands-on work, but just to mention that Honduras enthusiasm that came from the work that would be taking place there. In 2019, for the first time, we reached 1,700 shoeboxes for Operation Christmas Child. And I should mention, over the years leading up to that, we had 400, we had 500, we had 700, we had 900. One year we have 1,200. We hit 1,500. And for these last 2 years, we have exceeded 1,700 boxes, and that is just a tribute to the giving spirit of our church and enthusiasm. When it comes to packing day, that's a great day. We all go into the gym, young and old, children to senior adults, and we put toys and education supplies all in those shoe boxes and pack them and pray over them. What a great thing that's taking place there. Now, you see the rest of the things, and you can follow along. I hope you will read them all together, and I hope I haven't missed anything. One of the things I want to note as you read through it that you don't see is you don't see that North Cleveland Baptist family has ever had a major split. Has ever been an issue or an item that created such angst and anxiety in the church family that we had a old church split take place? That hasn't happened. I pray that record continues for a long time. I believe some of the stability of our congregation has been on that mission focus that has gone to how we can serve, how we can work together in serving, how we can keep our mind on other people and their needs more than maybe what our preferences would be otherwise. And so I will note that. One other thing I will note before I close is in your material also is a floor plan of North Cleveland Baptist Church. These are in signed format that is at the entrances of all of our buildings, just to give you an idea of how things are laid out. For the in-person class I taught, we took a tour of the buildings to kind of let them see some areas that they may not have been in before. But you can look at the floor plan that is there and kind of know about how our facilities are laid out and the classrooms that are there, where the offices are, and those matters. So I hope that's been interesting to you. There's so much to share about the story of our church, and we will work on resources to help folks know more about who we are. Thank you for sharing with us, and we will meet again next week with our fourth session on Introduction to North Cleveland Baptist. God bless.